And no hurry, it's okay. So um, let's see. We're gonna sit a bunch and then talk about it, and then I'm gonna probably if we have time, give a short talk, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. But so the instructions for Zazen were written down in the 13th century by this guy who's the short version of his name is Dogen, right? And he based them on instructions that were written a few hundred years before that in China. But basically, what he says is sit in full lotus or half lotus. So you don't have to sit in full lotus or half lotus, but I thought I'd demonstrate a little bit about why he would say that. So if you're sitting in full lotus, right? Which turns out once you get used to it after 30 years or something like that, it's actually an incredibly comfortable posture. But the reason to demonstrate it is it's a cross-legged posture in which, first of all, your knees are kind of in tight, right? It's not there are other postures where they're a little tighter, but your knees are pretty close together, and the down pressure on your knees is completely even, right? Which is great. So that promotes a kind of balance and comfort. And if you're sitting if you're sitting in a chair, or if you're sitting in a kind of one of those cross-legged postures where your knees are up and your weight is resting on your calves and feet or something like that. So you can still get that feeling, like just get a sense that the down pressure on either side of your lower body is about the same, and you have a tripod of support that involves contact with the mat with your two legs, and obviously contact with whatever it is that you're sitting on, a chair or a cushion. And if you're if you're sitting in a chair, it's good to sort of feel the same way about your feet, like they should feel solidly planted and kind of like they're taking a little bit of weight, right? If you wanted to sit in half lotus, you just press your left foot against your right thigh. That's the other posture he recommends. Nobody is using this posture in this room, but there's another one, just for information, that in Japanese they call seiza, and we use that a bunch as well. This is what it looks like. This is what the simplest version of it looks like from the side. You're just sitting on your legs. This is great, but the problem is that for most people who aren't used to sitting like this, their legs fall asleep pretty quickly. So it can help to take a cushion and put it under your butt to elevate you off your legs. Or I don't know if there are any benches here. There might be some, but you can also use a yoga block or other things to elevate yourself. And it also is good. I mean, so you can, when you're sitting in seiza, it has, your knees are generally pretty close together, and the weight on your legs is quite balanced, actually. The longest I've ever sat in seiza was something like 3.5 hours. I went to a tea ceremony, and it was a lovely ceremony. And the person that was serving tea is somebody I like very much, and so the whole thing was great. But at the end of sitting in seiza for 3.5 hours, I never imagined that my legs could be as asleep as that, but they were just insanely asleep. It was horrible. Well, it was okay, but it was also kind of horrible. So anyway, so that's the way to think about your lower body posture. It should feel planted. It should feel balanced. It should feel like you can rest on it for, well, at least a half an hour, because that's roughly how much we're going to be sitting. You might want to consider developing a lower body posture that feels like you could rest on it for a week or something like that, right? So, and then above that, we're going to talk a little bit about this later. So I'll start now. There's this place, sort of a couple of inches below your navel, right in the middle of your body, which in Japanese they call hara, right? It's romanized Hara. And it's kind of the bottom of your breathing apparatus, basically. And it's in Zazen, in Zen meditation, it's really kind of the focal point of your posture. So we'll start there. So you can imagine that there's a pillar planted in your hara, right? So right in the middle of your body, kind of, at the bottom of your diaphragm, and it's supporting your sternum, right? So, and maybe lifting your sternum a little bit. So what that does is it lifts your chest and allows your shoulders to spread out, and also relaxes the muscles in the skin in your shoulders and kind of up your neck, basically, which is good. So with that, the next thing to notice is the tilt of your pelvis, right? So you've got your chest lifted, your back is kind of straight and is taking its natural curves in near the base of the spine, out around the shoulders and at the neck, right? So you might try tilting your pelvis forward and seeing what happens. What happens generally is once you tilt it forward a bit, you start to get some compression in your lower back, and that's a sign that you've gone too far. And the other way, you start to feel a pull in your psoas muscles and upper quads, right? So somewhere in the middle there's a spot where your pelvis is tilted in such a way that you can feel a little bit of tension in the muscles in your lower back and in your sort of lower abdominal muscles, but it's a light tension. And if you then rock left and right, rock forwards and backwards, and find the midpoint there, what you can tell is that you're sitting upright largely because of a sort of modest tension in the large muscles of your body, which is kind of what you want, because you don't want to be cranking anything to stay upright when you're doing it for half an hour or so. That's the thing your body really doesn't like very much. So it's good to have it feel relaxed and stable, right? So the energy in your shoulders is out and down, and similarly with the arms. You don't have to do this, but the canonical mudra that they use in Zazen it's called the cosmic mudra. You put your left palm on top of your right palm, bend your fingers around in a circle, very light contact between your hands and thumbs, and place that right against your lower abdomen with your thumb tips probably at or above your navel, and everything else kind of hanging below. And what you'll notice also is that this hand posture also brings attention to your hara. It's like there's this sort of cantaloupe-sized region that includes your hands. That's the focal point of your posture. Let the head float up off the shoulders as though it was attracted to the ceiling. Let the face fall into a vertical plane with the nose pretty much right above the navel and the ears in line with the shoulders. Close your mouth, teeth and lips both shut, and maybe place your tongue gently against the front roof of your mouth. We sit with our eyes open and with our gaze downcast and soft without really looking at anything, just bringing in, just seeing, just bringing in the light, bringing in the maybe some pattern, and also wide, so that your awareness of your visual awareness of the periphery is sort of constant, right? And notice what it does to your mental state when you enact that gaze. Something about being softly and inclusively present. So in that, now that we've sort of found the posture, so put your attention in your hara again. So right down at the underneath, sort of in the middle of your lower abdomen there. This is one of the locks in yoga, and we can use it that way. So try this. Try slightly tightening your lower abdominal muscles and maybe the muscles of your pelvic floor, so that you feel a little tension in your hara. And with that, breathe all the way out. When you're breathed all the way out, just pause and notice that there's not really a lot going on, right? And then your diaphragm will say, time to breathe in. And so you let go of the tension, but you kind of keep your eye there in your hara, right? And you just allow the breath to flood in and fill your body. And then do that again, maybe 3 to 5 times, just to sort of focus your posture. You'll notice a couple of things, I think, if you do that. One is, if you lock your hara a little bit on the out breath, it tends to carry any residual tension in your upper body down into your hara and just drop it there. And on the in breath, you can feel the body fill with this kind of energy that comes from the breath. It's as though the breath collapses into the hara on the out breath and floods in from in the hara. I know it's not really happening like that, but that's the sensation. Floods into the hara on the in breath and fills the body. So yeah, do that about 3 to 5 times, and then just let your breath take its natural rate and depth, and still keep a little bit of. You don't need to keep tension in your hara, but keep your attention there. Watch your breath from there. Hmm. No, I'm so sorry. I thought I'd put that on silent. The 13th century instructions say a lot about posture. They talk about where you should sit. They talk about telling everyone to go away, then stop bothering you. But they say almost nothing about what's happening in the mind. He just says one thing. He says, think about not thinking. How do you think about not thinking? He says, non-thinking. And then he's done. He says that's the essential art of Zazen. So to expand on that a little bit, it seems to me likely that each one of you has had a few thoughts since we started. If you haven't, please tell me about it when we're done. But usually we have this natural cycle of attention where a kind of broad, receptive, embodied attention that just takes in perceptions and thoughts, holds them briefly, and then lets them go. Plays a sort of balancing act with a mode of attention that's substantially more focused on the self, ruminative thought, measurement and judgment of experience, and all that other stuff. That, according to the sort of long form of the Buddha's first sermon, is the cause of human suffering and a lot of other suffering too. But also has other functions. So the thing to notice is that you can be present for a little while, and then a thought comes up that has enough juice and intrigue that it pulls you in and pulls your attention away from the body, the contents of the sensorium, this kind of broad receptive attention, and pulls it into some focus on the thoughts and emotions that are arising in the mind, right? And that transition is hard to catch because your ruminative faculty does this sort of active erasure and says, no, you should be paying attention to this. But even in the middle of being pretty tangled up in thinking, your body is always inviting you to open up and pay attention to what's going on in the wider world. And the first few times it does that when we're thinking, we probably ignore it. But after a while, the invitation gets sufficiently compelling that all of a sudden we're back in this mode of presence again. And sometimes it happens because there's a particular sensation or perception like, oh, my knee hurts, or a sound, maybe even a smell. But sometimes it just happens with this sort of automatic flavor. It's like there's a timer, and the timer says something like, after a while, you should really go back to paying attention. and your mind does it naturally, right? And when that happens, The request is to really settle there, to notice the whole experience. Because you can, when you're in that mode, you can notice the thinking, right? You can be aware of, in this broader sense, of your thinking in the context of the whole body, right? You can be aware of the emotional underpinnings of the thinking in the context of your whole body. And then as the thought usually settles, at that point, just watch what happens as deliberately and carefully and wholeheartedly as you can. And see if you can get a sense of your own personal cycle of attention, how it works, what the time frames are, how it shifts around depending on whether you're agitated or calm, happy or sad, all of that. That's what Dogen calls non-thinking. All right. So let's stretch out a teensy bit. That was a bunch of sitting. So it can help to twist a bit to stretch out the muscles in your neck and back and so on. So once you twist your head over to the left, look over your left shoulder. Remember to breathe while you're doing this. And then round to the right, look over the right shoulder. And then full body. So put your right palm on your left knee. Tuck your left arm around behind your back and twist around to the left. Keep your back straight. Keep your head floating towards the ceiling. You should be able to feel this all the way down in your right hip. Sort of release. And then back the other way. Left palm on the right knee. Tuck your right arm around behind your back. Twist to the right. Stay upright. Look over your right shoulder. And then back to the center. So one last thing. Lock your fingers together behind your back. And stretch your hands, your arms up. Lean forward. And back up. All right. That's good too. So, does anybody have any questions about any of that? Like about what we did, about sitting in general, about your particular sitting, what your experience is, the posture, the I don't know, the the function of Zen practice in general, any of that stuff. Any questions at all? Well, good. So here's what I was going to talk about. So, the literature of Zen is this massive collection of stories um, that were cobbled together, and honestly, some of them are things that probably really happened. A number of them are clearly things that didn't happen. They're essentially mythology, and then some of them are kind of fables that were clearly made up to stress a particular point. And I'm not totally sure about the one I'm going to tell which of those kinds it is. It's not particularly supernatural or mythological, but it's goofy enough so that it could be a fable, basically. So these stories were collected over the course of several hundred years, sort of during the Tang Dynasty in China, and then for a number of reasons, people got all exercised about turning them into a literature, right? And the literature included this this idea of a lineage in which the mind of the teacher is passed along to the mind of the student, down through generation after generation, which, kind of aligns with the whole importance of ancestry in Chinese culture, right? But has a number of other functions as well, and one of them is that it allowed the literature of Chinese Zen to primarily talk about the sayings and doings of Chinese teachers and students, right? As opposed to, I think, a lot of the earlier literatures of Buddhism were mostly about the teachings of the Buddha per se, right? So what there had to be in this lineage is a guy, or some of these people are not guys, some of them are women, but because most of the societies involved were highly patriarchal, and most of them are guys, and that somebody had to bring this stuff to China, and the guy that was picked out for that was this semi-mythical character named Bodhidharma. And one of the standard questions that people ask each other in these stories is, well, what's the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming here and bringing this practice, basically, right? And so there are three people in this story. One of them is the guy who's asking the question. His name is Lung Ya. And then he asks it of two teachers, one named Suyen and the other one named Linji, who is very, very famous, and one of the probably one of the most famous Zen teachers of the Chinese, in the Chinese literature, basically. And so he says he first asked Suyen. He says they're sitting around, and he says, "So what's the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the West, and and bringing this particular style of Buddhism?" There was already lots of Buddhism in China, but the idea is that this particular kind of mind-to-mind transmission happened when Bodhidharma showed up, right? And Suyen says, "Yeah, wait, can you pass me that meditation brace?" And what a meditation brace is, I don't know if you've ever seen these things. They're a sort of a T-shaped thing. There's a stick and a little hand rest on top of it, and they're particularly associated with Indian mendicants and renunciates in South Asia, right? So the idea is you plant it. You're sitting here and we'll say for the sake of argument, half lotus. You plant it either here or here, and it comes up here, and you can actually rest your hands on it. And so it makes it possible to doze off while you're meditating, basically, and also acts as a support for your body, right? And so Suyan says, "Yeah, can you hand me that meditation brace?" And Lung Ya says, "Yeah, sure." And he hands him this stick. It was probably pretty hard and pretty heavy, and Suyan hits him with it really hard, right? And then Lung Ya says, "Okay, so you hit me, and I let you hit me, but nonetheless, there's no meaning to Bodhidharma's coming from the West." But just to be sure, he asked Linji, this other teacher who's kind of famous for hitting people. He says, and he falls for it again. He says, "Hey, what's the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the West?" And Linji says, "Oh wait, can you hand me that zafu?" And he hands him the zafu, and Linji hits him with it, right? And again, right? And he says, "Okay, fine. You hit me again." Right? I got hit again. You can hit me all you want, but there's no inherent meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the West, right? So that's a incredibly goofy story, and it seems quite likely that it's didn't really happen, and it's a fable, but it could have, right? I mean, these people did tremendously goofy things, and some of them um, really just you just couldn't make the stuff up, right? But so what is that all about, right? I mean, one of the things that's pretty obvious about it is that um, you know both the teachers are pointing to the fact that the foundation of the practice of Zen, which was supposedly brought to China by Bodhidharma. In fact, most likely Zen developed organically out of a whole bunch of threads in the Chinese Buddhism that had to do with um, the confluence with Taoism and a kind of um, reaction against the earliest introduction of Buddhism into Chinese culture involved sending people around all over South Asia and Southeast Asia to collect texts, right? And then bring them back to China and also interestingly Central Asia. And they had these translation mills where they translate these gigantic Mahayana texts and maybe also some of the other Buddhist literatures later, the Pali Canon and so on, and then write equally massive commentaries on them. And so there was this, because China was an extremely literary society, right? And so, and the class of people that were mostly involved in this were sort of like the children of the of the sort of administrative elite, right? So they were all highly educated and, had all, learned how to write poetry in middle school and so on. And so they're really pretty sharp at that stuff. And they knew what a literature was because they had three famous classical literatures at the time. They had the legalist literature, the Confucian literature, and the Taoist literature to use as models, right? And then there's some other stuff as well, right? So there was a lot of emphasis on textual study, and after a while, some people were like, should we really be just, like sticking our nose in the books all day long? Isn't there something more to this than that, right? And so over time, this sort of counterculture developed in the Chinese Buddhist world where as supposedly, both Tsuyen and Linji pointed out, the focus was something about meditative practice, right? That you shouldn't have to study, and maybe studying is good, but isn't definitive anyway. And the way you really study what it is to be awake and alive and completely human is by studying the self, studying the activity of the self, right? And so Dogen, the guy that I was talking about earlier that wrote the Zazen instruction, he says it very specifically. He says, to study the way is to study the self. And when you study the self, you forget the self. And when you forget the self, everything wakes you up, right? So your encounter with, the bird song and the twinge in your knee and et cetera, all are an invitation to be as awake and alive as you can possibly be, right? And so that's the first sort of layer of meaning in this story, is that the both the teachers are saying, duh, Zazen. But there's another part of it too, right? So what does it mean when, I mean, clearly this guy, Lung Ya, knew what he was doing, right? What does it mean when he says there's no inherent meaning in Bodhidharmas coming from the West, right? Zen is a Buddhist school, right? And in particular, it's a Mahayana Buddhist school. And the primary philosophical principle in Mahayana Buddhism is this, right? So back in the day, before the advent of the Mahayana, there were the largest Buddhist school in the world was called the Sarvastivadin school, and they kind of had this science of mind approach to Buddhism, right? Where the idea was that they wrote these documents that intended to be, and were pretty good actually, at being a kind of exhaustive analysis of human subjectivity, right? Of what it means to have a human experience and a human mind, right? And they cooked up this very elaborate scheme with lots and lots of layers and stages and processes and so on and so forth. And they captured in documents which were called Abhidharma, which is, it just means, another additional dharma, right? Where dharma was initially the teachings of the Buddha, right? And they were kind of naive realists in the sense that that they thought all this stuff was actually fundamentally real and true, and that the function of a practitioner was to study it and get familiar with it and study it more and more deeply until finally they discovered new things about it, and then they would write it down in the next version of the Abhidharma, right? And so it was so then it was like science, right? And so they were the most popular school, but there are these other schools that were, by contrast, kind of nihilistic, right? They were like, nah, none of this stuff is real. In fact, there isn't anything real. It's just mind fiddling with mind, basically. And we're all just a mind that's broken up into little pieces, all just bouncing off each other, right? And these two schools or multiple schools would debate and argue, and there was a lot of backing and forthing, and there was this famous technique or practice where when there was a debate, everybody would come, and the two debating teams would bring their flag, and if they won the debate, if they were judged to have won the debate, they get to run their flag up the flagpole, right? So everybody would know that the Sarvastivadins or the I don't know, some other school had won the debate, right? And finally, a number of people kind of got sick of this, and the provenance of this material is very murky. The story about how it was discovered is that there was this guy named Nagarjuna, who was walking down the street one day, and these snakes came up to him and they said, "Psst, come here. We have something to show you." And they dragged him to this underground cavern with an ocean in it, basically. And they said, "Look, there, under the water." And there were these books. And they said, "Take the books. You can publish them." And so he published them, and supposedly they were the Mahayana canon. That's probably not how it happened, right? But Nagarjuna is considered to be a historical figure, but there's two versions of them. There's one in Tibetan Buddhism and one in sort of Chinese Buddhism, and they have radically different timelines and kind of maybe wrote some of the same stuff, but also were credited with writing very different bodies of literature and so on and so forth. So it's really complicated. But in any case, there is this document that's something called something like The Virtue of the Middle Way, that was written by somebody called Nagarjuna. And basically what he says is this. He says, you Sarvastivadins, nihilists, you're both wrong. You can't possibly be right. And the reason is that one of the primary principles of Buddhism from the very beginning was that everything in the universe arises together in an interconnected way, right? And he says, if you take that as a principle and you use it, and this document it's a long series of logical negations that are driven by this principle of sort of interconnected co-arising of all being, right? And he says, obviously, none of all of the categories of experience and the objects that the Sarvastivadins think they've identified can't be real, because you look at a boundary in a world where everything is interconnected, and if you look carefully enough, the boundary isn't there, right? But he also says, but also the nihilists, they have to have it wrong, because there's this interconnected activity that has karmic consequences, right? So and what he decided was to call what everything has, or they call this principle the principle of, okay, so in English it's translated as emptiness. In Sanskrit it's something like shunyata, right? And it's a trick, basically. It means empty, but it also is a word for a particular kind of meditative, concentrated state, right? So he talks about it as an experiential quality and a philosophical quality at the same time, right? And that's the sort of ground of Mahayana thinking, is that nothing whatsoever has an inherent meaning or permanent abiding self. Everything is just arising together, and your task as a practitioner is to stay close to that, right? And so that's what that story is about, right? There's no meaning, just stay close. How do you stay close? Well, you practice staying close by sitting zazen. In the end, it becomes possible to stay close to the kind of co-arising of all being when you're walking around or lying down or buying oat milk at Trader Joe's, basically. So anyway, any questions about that? Or anything else? Well, right, then let's sit some more. So yeah. See if you can notice how it works when you've somehow been brought to attention to a state of receptive awareness. Your your body and your sensorium are a welter of sensation, like a river. But what typically happens is your attention turns from one perception to the next in this way where it picks it up. And there are a variety of sensations, proprioceptive sensation of the skin, sound, sight, etc., and also thought, right? Your attention lands on one of these and holds it for a moment, maybe spits out does a little pattern recognition and spits out some sort of explanation or response, and then just lets it go. And the same can be true for thought. Sometimes our mind starts suggesting thoughts that we could possibly get tangled up in. Something about dinner, etc. So notice how that works. That's the ground of human subjectivity. That set of processes working together. In the ancient scheme, they're divided into 5 layers. There's sensation, perception, mental formation. I take it back. Sensation, perception, mental formation, and consciousness, and then some others. So just to notice how they fit together. Notice how they operate together. Notice how only a modest percentage of the sensations you're experiencing in any moment even rise to a level of perception. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. It was great sitting with you. I really appreciate it. Yeah.